Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here with us this evening. I am calling to order this City Council virtual meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order of Tuesday, June 28th, 2022. For those of you who are viewing us through our social media platform, you could view us through Hartford Public Access TV, through Facebook, Comcast Channel 96, Frontier Channel 6032, and also through the YouTube platform. This evening, I'm joined by the following council members as I see them on the screen. Councilwoman Marilyn Rossetti, Councilman Gale, Councilman Sanchez, Councilwoman Shirley Surgeon, Councilman Nickstrom, members from the Hartford Public Access TV, and for Corporation Counsel, Attorney Alex Lombardi, and Councilwoman Tiana Hercules, who is joining us. First item of this evening's meeting is item, and our only item, 2.1, with accompanying resolution to accept the recommendations prepared by the Charter Revision Commission to amend the charter for the city of Hartford. And this evening we'll be hearing from the chair for the Charter Revision, Mr. James Wolfe, and the attorney for the Charter Commission, Mr. Steve Mednick. I personally want to thank you both for the amazing job that you and the commission have done so far in getting this over to council for review. So without further ado, I am going to turn the floor over to our chair of the Charter Commission, Mr. James Wolfe.
Thank you, Council President, and good evening, members of council. So I'm the chair of the Charter Revision Commission, and I really appreciate the invite this evening to discuss with you the draft of the charter that the Charter Revision Commission has prepared just about for the past year now, that we have sent over for your review. And with me this evening, I have, as Council President alluded to, Attorney Steve Mednick. So Steve has served as the counsel to the commission from its inception. He helped organize our panel discussions and was charged with drafting the proposed revisions to the charter. He's an expert in municipal law and has served as outside counsel to the previous 3 charter revision commissions here in Hartford, as well as commissions in New Britain, New Haven, Bridgeport, and numerous other cities. So I've asked Steve to prepare a PowerPoint presentation this evening, which walks us all through the proposed changes chapter by chapter. And I'll hand the floor over to him momentarily. And then once Steve has wrapped up his presentation, we look forward to answering your questions. So Steve, without further ado, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam President, does everybody see the screen? Is it up?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure that it was there. That's our Charter Commission. The commission met a number of times during the course of the past year. I'm not going to go through these early screens on what is a Hartford City Charter. You know what that is. We talked about it when you had me before the council some time ago. We talked about home rule and what a Charter Commission is. I'll talk a little bit about the process. We had a 14-member commission. We first met in April of 2021. We had 29 meetings. We had monthly public comment sessions at our meetings from April of 2021 to May of 2022. We had 2 statutory public hearings, almost a year apart, actually, May 20th of 2021 and 24th of May 2022. As you'll see, we had numerous subject-based panel discussions. So what's before you tonight is our draft. And that's a term of art. The commission provided the draft to the council. The council is the appointing authority. And you, as the appointing authority, have a period of time. It's going to be a little shorter than the statute allows you because we held off on sending this over until you were finished with your budget. but you'll have time to go through the chapters of the document. I'll be happy to answer any questions, both in a formal setting and an informal setting through the president of the council. Happy to answer any questions whatsoever. During this period of time, you will have a required public hearing. I believe it's scheduled for next week. You can still have meetings after that public hearing, but you have to act on it within 15 days after your last public hearing. So the expectation would be that this would be done, my hope is done in the first or second week of July, but probably up to around July 15th, because the bottom line deadline to get it on the ballot for this November would be approval by your council sometime near the mid or end of August, so that we can get the questions into the Secretary of State's office by the first week in September. When you act on it after your public hearing, if you don't provide any recommendations, you can take a final action, up or down, in whole or in part. You can remove provisions, you can add provisions. But if you have questions, you have recommendations, there are things that you start scratching your head on and say, why did the commission do this, or why didn't the commission do that? You can, by majority vote, vote recommendations to the commission, and the commission would meet again and would have to report back to you within 30 days. I've advised the commission they will not have 30 days. They will have less than 30 days to do that, because the calendar is getting very compressed, but they can then only consider those items that went before you. So my general rule with appointing authorities, with city councils, is if you have any question whatsoever, raise it in the broadest possible way that gives us maximum flexibility to actually try to work out the problem, as opposed to saying we want 15 people here as opposed to 5. Say, would you reconsider your decision to put 5 people on this commission instead of another number? And that gives the commission maximum flexibility to come back to you with an answer that you will find acceptable if there's a consensus on an issue. So I hope that gives you a feel for where we are in the process. And I will now try to walk through the process a little bit more. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but as you can see, I provided during the course of the process with the commission a number of background documents. On this page, there are 11. We talked about budget, finance, Board of Education, some mundane things in Chapter 2 and 3, which we'll go over in a minute. Boards and commissions, you'll see we did an awful lot in that area. Enterprise funds and special revenues, you'll see the results of that a little later. Significant changes for the city treasurer. We did some significant study on police commissions, appointment authority, and then on the next page, more information on the treasurer, common council, borrowing issues, the absence and disability of the mayor. You'll see these issues come up as we go through the charter. One of the significant things we'll talk about in a moment are the definitions that will be here. Also common council staff, internal audit commission, Board of Education. We had a number of panels. We had assistance from one of your colleagues. Actually, one of your colleagues was on our commission, John Gale, and I want to thank him for his extraordinary service on our commission. Nick LeBron also provided some help to us during this process on the Board of Education, where we had multiple panels to discuss setting the context for local issues on the Board of Ed. And you'll see we made some changes on Board of Education elections. We'll talk about that in a bit. We also took a look around the state. We had former Mayor Finch, First Selectman Matt Knickerbocker, Elizabeth Brown from the Board of Education in Waterbury, Susan Glennon, the chair of the Board of Education in Milford, and an extraordinary professor, Domingo Morel from Rutgers, to talk about different models and public participation issues at boards of ed. We also had a third panel on Board of Ed where we discussed with a professor from Northwestern and from Brown, again, more issues on public participation. You'll see we added a pretty vigorous standard requiring more outreach by the Board of Education as a result of some of those discussions. We talked about police commission and the work that you're doing in Hartford. with our corporation counsel, your corporation counsel, my law school classmate, Howard Rifkin, and Mike Lawler, the former chair of the Judiciary Committee and a professor at University of New Haven, member of the New Haven Board of Police Commissioners, talked about the police commission experience in New Haven. We had substantial discussion on city council, common council issues. A gentleman named Al Lucas, some of you actually may know Al. Al's been kind of a legendary figure in local legislative politics. He's the head of the only real Office of Legislative Services in the state of Connecticut at the Board of Alders in New Haven. When I served in your capacity way back when I was a young child, about 29 on the Board of Ed, on the Board of Alders, we hired Al. I actually hired Al as a young guy out of Yale, and he runs a terrific shop. It's a shop that we hope you will be able to emulate if the provisions in the charter we're going to talk about in a few moments are adopted by you and ultimately by the people in New Haven. We talked to various representatives of different governments. My client and good friend, Dominique Baez, the president of the Hamden Legislative Council, talked about hybrid councils, Dean Esposito, the mayor and former council member in Danbury, Paul Pernaruski, president of the Board of Alders in Alderman in Waterbury. The reason we talked to them is, like you, I remember I was doing Hartford and Waterbury simultaneously, and you were two of the only at-large systems left in the state. Waterbury has abandoned you. Waterbury has moved to a district system, but they have a district system with a minority party representation entity within each of their districts. That's why he was on that panel. Gene Nacera, from a smaller city, but it's an at-large town like you, and he talked about why they didn't go to a district system in that town. And then Tom Livingston, who's a client of mine, I'm just starting charter revision for Norwalk to talk about their hybrid system as well. So we had a lot of really interesting dialogue with people on many subjects. I'll be happy, and the chair will be happy to answer any questions about those as we go through the process. So we're going to start with chapter 1. And I think we've provided you with obviously the charter. I think I also sent out a red line version of the charter that you can look at as well. And again, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. And the other thing, I believe, yes, our charter is relatively well annotated. If you look at the bottom of the page on the charter to help you through it, you can actually see what is new. If it's a red line, it'll be even clearer, but the footnotes are attached to the red line so you can see actually what the new language is in each section of the charter. So chapter 1 is a chapter called Incorporation and Boundaries. What we tried to do in this chapter is establish kind of uniform standards. I've been actually recommending this in all my towns. Hamden has it, which I'm meeting with tomorrow night, actually Fairfield tomorrow night as well. And what we do here is we've established a whole series of definitions. When you as a council member go into the charter and you look at the charter and you see the word notice, notice could mean multiple things in your current charter. But in the new charter, you will see that it's a defined term, and you'll go back to the definitions and see what it means, because it's a defined term that is carried throughout the charter. We also define something as simple. You may think it's a simple thing, but we define what a majority vote of the council is, so that we don't have to define it, that a majority vote of the council means more than half of the votes that have been cast by members by a meeting at a meeting in which a quorum is present, period. That's it, once. So when you see that term, you know what it means. We don't have to define it every time. If we have a different standard, supermajority, 2/3 vote, those terms are not defined because they're not terms that are used as commonly as the majority vote standard. Significantly, we also address the issues of meeting notice and hearing notice and public notice. Most importantly, we did it to also take a look at the issue of making sure that the new electronic world we're living in, this meeting is a good example of that, is represented adequately there. We also wanted to make it very clear that all of the historic newspaper notice requirements are gone. You can still have newspaper notice. You as a council can decide that it's important to notice an ordinance in the newspaper, but it's your decision. You're not bound by it in the charter. You can make the decision that newspaper notice is required. The mayor could recommend that you adopt a newspaper notice standard. You could adopt it by ordinance. It's not mandated by charter. What the charter does say is that the state mandates it, you still have to do it. But I thought that in light of the expense of newspaper notice, about the only people in favor of retaining it are the people who own daily newspapers who need the revenue. I think that's basically where we are in the world of newspaper notice. So those are the major changes. We have days, we define days as calendar days. We define what an elector is and various other definitions. So, Madam President, do you want me to stop at the end of each chapter, or do you want me to just run through the whole thing?
Actually, I'm going to defer to my council colleagues for a majority. Do you guys want to ask questions after each chapter, or do you want to ask questions at the end? Councilwoman Surgeon?
If you don't mind, Madam Chair, I would like to ask a question after each chapter.
Are there any questions?
Not for this chapter.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank
Actually,
you.
Steve, I have a question. John Gale.
Yes, sir.
I apologize, Councilman Gale. I can't see everyone on the screen.
Yeah, no, that's all right, Council President. I understand. Just interestingly, last night at City Council, we had a situation with a vote that was taken where we had a quorum, but the number of council persons actually voting was a total of 4. And all 4 voted in favor of something. And the ruling was that for that particular thing, it was a majority of those present and voting that counted. Is that fit within the new definition of majority that's in this charter?
Well, yeah, it says more than half the votes have been cast by members at a meeting in which a quorum is present. So, if it's a majority of the quorum, you are a majority of the council.
Well,
Majority with the quorum, you are a majority. You have a majority vote.
Yeah, but there was a little. Well, let's see. The quorum was 7 people. 3 abstained from voting.
That's interesting. More than half of the votes have been cast by members of the meeting at which a quorum is present. So 4 of 7 is more than the majority. That's because you don't count the abstainers. So it's a 4-zip vote. It seems odd, but you had a quorum.
Okay.
That would carry. That would carry.
And,
I don't
and
think
it
it's
did.
it's an unusual situation, but it would carry that way.
So, okay.
If you want to have a stricter standard, you can do that. But
No,
yeah,
I know that we did. I just want. I think we're probably just interested in clarity.
yep.
And I know that what our corp council referred to, and what I've often referred to when I've been parliamentarian of various bodies, is using the term a majority of those present and voting. And that, that puts you in a situation, if you have a quorum, but less than a quorum choose to vote, it still can carry if it's a majority of present and voting.
Yeah, the quorum is your legal foundation. And if the remainder of the people vote, it's imagine those present and voting are the 4 people who voted is what it comes down to.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Council President, can I
Yes.
just pipe in for a second? I
Yes.
regret that my Zoom froze as soon as Councilman Gale started making the point that I was considering. So Councilman Gale, I don't know, I don't want to make you repeat yourself, but you were making the point about the confusion at yesterday's meeting, and what was the end of your question?
Oh, just asking if the new definition that's proposed in the charter would fit the situation that occurred last night.
Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to update everybody on council yet about that confusion. following yesterday's meeting, and it's a point to make to Attorney Mednick just to make sure we ultimately don't have provisions in the charter that conflict. What happened was there was a vote of 4 people, as Councilman Gill, I think, mentioned. All 4 voted in favor. That after consulting the council rules that didn't define how many needed to vote in favor for something to carry. But Rule 13 does refer to Robert's Rules of Order when the rules are silent. I ruled that ultimately the motion passed because a majority of those present and voting voted in favor. However, something was nagging at me last night, and I thought that I had seen a definition somewhere of how many people had to vote on council for something to carry. So I consulted the charter, and I can cite the provision, Attorney Mednick, so you have it in the future. It's under powers of council. It's Chapter 4, Section 6C. Says that no ordinance, resolution, motion, or vote shall be passed by council except motions of a purely procedural nature, unless it shall have received the affirmative votes of at least a majority of the full membership of the council. The full membership of the council being 9, our charter currently requires 5 votes for any resolution, any ordinance. And so this morning when I got to work, I notified the town clerk of that fact. And yesterday's vote on 4.6 did not pass because of that charter provision. So I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to update everybody on council on that fact. But when Attorney Mednick was bringing up the definition, I wanted to make the point to Councilman Gill about that confusion, because since it appeared in an area of the charter, but I also certainly don't want conflicting provisions within the charter by defining it in a way that's different than Chapter 4, Section 6C. So just wanted to bring that out.
So, my
Council-
question, I'm sorry.
Councilwoman, I believe Councilman Sanchez was before.
Okay, I'll wait, sir, ma'am.
So if I may, I think it's a really good point that the council brought up. So that is the standard, and that standard remains. And if that standard remains for that action, that trumps the definition, because the definition, this is an alternate voting standard than the remaining. So the definition is that it covers every vote that isn't otherwise defined, and this is a defined vote, as the Deputy Corporation Counsel indicated. It remains that way even in the modified charter, in the proposed charter. For ordinances, resolutions, motions, etc.
So,
Councilman Sanchez, you have the floor.
yes, through you, Madam President. So Attorney Mednick, so in this revision, can we amend this so that it will express that when a council member needs to recuse themselves, can they recuse themselves by a line item and still vote for the rest? Which, as I recall, I've done that before years ago, where there
I
was.
think you can govern that by your rules. I'm not sure there's any, or there might be an ethics ordinance that governs that as well. So I don't know what your rules currently say. I mean, if you want to have a standard in here, we probably could take a look at a standard that would allow for a vote by separating out the item. The way we used to do it when I was on the Board of Alders in New Haven is, if you have a bunch of people with conflicts, it gets really messy, is you just basically separate out the item that people have conflicts on so they can vote on the rest of the budget, for example. And then the other item is then voted by the remainder of the parties, of the colleagues. So there's ways procedurally to allow for members of a body to in fact vote when they have a conflict on only one provision of a large omnibus item before the council.
Understood. I appreciate that. So that, in other words, we could have made several motions to sever those line items from the entire list and then therefore voted on the entire list and with the entire council members who are present. And then after that, vote on the other. But then it still stands where there's only 4 of us that were present. And I wonder if in the charter revision, if we can include language where at least with the remainder of those council members who are not recusing themselves, can the majority be of that number, meaning the best out of 4? So that will be 3.
Well, you can do that if you take the defined term and replace the standard that the council was just talking about and have that as your general standard, then you would be able to do that. My general view is that might be fine for a resolution. It might be fine for a motion. Do you want it to be the standard for an ordinance?
I understand.
Do you want to adopt laws of your community at a lesser standard? I think we can. I think when we get to 6C, we could talk about segregating out some of the other votes that fall into the category that Council Lombardi just referred to.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Appreciate it.
Councilwoman Surgeon, followed by Councilman Mixtum. You're on mute, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, Council President. So let me make sure I'm clear. So your definition for the majority vote in council is not the same definition as the one Attorney Lombardi quoted in Chapter 4, Section 60.
Yeah, so it would be the term that is used for things that are not covered by the section that Council Lombardi referred to.
Okay. All right. All right.
And as was just raised by one of the other members, if you want to pull some of the other categories out of that to allow for the more relaxed majority standard, we can do that. We can talk about that when we get to the section on the council.
All right. Thank you.
Councilman Mixtum.
Thank you, Council President. I have a question on a different topic. Procedurally, you mentioned at the beginning, Attorney Mednick, that we as a council can strike some parts of what's proposed or all of it or none of it. Procedurally, when we meet to do that, do we just sort of go by our own rules? In other words, any council member can make a motion to strike this much and then we just vote on that?
Correct.
There's nothing special.
Yeah, that's the way. What I generally do on the nights that you are going through it, we will go through chapter by chapter. The president would ask, are there any, are people in favor of chapter 1? Ayes, nays, no, I have a question. I'd like to look at the definition of X. Would you, and then if you have a second and a motion, then you would approve a council recommendation that the Charter Commission review this issue. Or if you're at the end of the process, you want to take the definition out. I don't like that definition. I'd rather define majority by the rules of the council. Let us decide what our majority is. We don't want that in the charter. I'm not talking you into that. I'm just saying that that's an option that you would have to disapprove in part the recommendation of the commission. So yes, you would have that ability. Should I go on to chapter 2 and 3?
Are there any other questions by any other council members? You may proceed, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. So in chapters 2 and 3, there are not a lot of changes. We deleted 2 provisions at the recommendation of the Corporation Council on benefit assessments and a power to adopt regulatory ordinances because we didn't need them. Those are old special act provisions, and we determined that they're not used by the city, and therefore why take up room in the charter? And so in chapter 2, those 2 sections went away. In chapter 3, the big change here was that 20 years ago, my first charter with your town, with your city, we broke off the Board of Education. Remember, the state took over the Board of Ed, and there was a state-run Board of Ed, and we created in the 2002 charter the hybrid, the bifurcated Board of Ed with the mayoral majority being appointed and the minority running. And it was determined at the time that we should have the elections for the Board of Ed in their own cycle. The thought being that it would it would generate interest, people would be much more engaged, and that they would come out in record numbers to support candidates for the Board of Ed. Apparently, that has not been the case. And so the commission made a determination that's going to take a couple of election cycles to get to move the Board of Ed to the same cycle that the council, the treasurer, and the mayor are on. And so that's the major change in Article 3. We also put in a provision in Article 3 that simply recites state law. It was one of my only charters that didn't have this provision in it, believe it or not, that no person shall be eligible for the nomination or election to elective office who's not an elector of the city. That is state law, but it was not reflected in our charter because I was going through it one day and I didn't see that standard. And so you'll see in Chapter 3, Section 4, B2, you'll see that new standard, and you'll see in the footnotes a reference to the applicable statute, which is 9-186. So those are the only changes in chapters 2 and 3. Any questions?
No questions, Attorney Mednick.
Thank you, Madam President. I will go to your favorite chapter, the Common Council. And so what we've done in this chapter is we took a look, and I have been I'm a strong advocate. I hate to display my bias, but if I have to display my bias, it's to a group of people who are the beneficiaries of that. I'm a very strong legislative creature. I served myself in the legislative body, and I don't think we can reinforce the authority of a legislative body enough in most charters. Mayors have an enormous advantage by virtue of their full-time positions. You are not full-time. And so it's important to have procedures in a charter to make sure that the two co-equal entities in the charter are adequately represented and that the council has the authority to exercise its legislative function. And so we add a number of things here that are, some of them are implicit, some of them have been in the charter before, but they're now being mentioned very clearly and explicitly. The adoption of capital and operating budgets has been in the charter for years. I wanted to put it in your section to make that absolutely clear. You are the fiscal authority of the municipality, and that's an important thing to point out. The second thing is new language that I believe it's new. One second, 45. Well, it's a modification, but it just makes it clear that you have the authority over multi-year contracts, agreements, settlements, and transactions. That you have the ability to engage in legislative oversight and review, and that we also have a provision in here that says that you need to adopt an ordinance governing procedures relating to the application of grants and other third-party revenues from public or private sources, which shall take into account reporting provisions and other accountability standards. Let me talk about that for a minute. If you remember, one of the things we looked at during the due diligence period is we studied the issue of enterprise funds, special funds, grants, and forfeiture funds. And we thought that it was important to make sure that the council had a handle on what I call the gross budget. That's the budget beyond the general fund budget. It's special funds, it's grant funds, to make sure that that you are aware of what's going on, you are part of what's going on, and this section makes that absolutely clear. The other thing I want to point out for the record, just to emphasize this point, is that multi-year contracts and I got to tell you, it's astonishing the number of municipalities where they don't realize this. The only body with the authority to bind the community beyond the current fiscal year is the legislative body, with the mayor either signing it into law or vetoing it and you overriding the mayor. You're the only body that can do a multi-year and come to an agreement on a multi-year contract, agreement, settlement, transaction. That's why the state statutes even recognize it in collective bargaining agreements. They don't give you enough time to commiserate on the results of a collective bargaining negotiation, but you do have to sign off on collective bargaining agreements. So I think it's really important, and the charter emphasizes that in this revision. One of the significant reforms that we are recommending for you is you currently have staff. The staff tends to be more oriented toward the individual members of the council as aides to the individuals. We're not saying that you should get rid of that staff, but we're saying that you may think about realigning it or supplementing it by having a professional staff that provides services to you in the performance of your duties. And one of the things I would recommend that the charter will have is you have a director of legislative services, somebody who's appointed to administer the staff, to work with the staff, to work on their staff assignments. The way they do it in New Haven, we weren't specific about that here. It really should be up to you as a legislative body to make a determination, is they tend to assign the staff by committee so that each of the committees has a dedicated subject matter expert who will be able to provide you as members of the council with some expertise that they will develop in their work as staff members to the particular committees. You could also have staff assigned to some of the things your current staff does with regard to constituent services. So there's ways to break it down so that you are able to achieve all the results that you're looking for. And ultimately, it would be a budgetary decision to decide how you want to allocate funds in order to operate your legislative staff. We also had a very specific provision regarding legal assistance. It's a right you've always had anyhow. We tried to just clarify how that would work. And actually, your colleague, Councilman Gale, actually asked us to put in a provision in the charter that dealt with not just legal assistance, but other consultants that you may, from time to time, want to have brought on board to help you look at issues before the council. We also recommend the hiring of a budget liaison. This is kind of an Uber staff member. The objective here would be to have somebody on your staff who can stand up toe-to-toe with the finance office, and really help you develop the budget, analyze the budget when the budget comes before you, track the budget during the course of the year to make sure that the budget is being expended in the way that it was intended, and to provide you with information if the administration is failing to address those issues. And so it's there's a budgetary issue here in terms of how much you can afford and what you want to do. But the commission felt it was really important to have that budget analyst position. New Haven does not have one. Hamden right now, I'm doing 3 charters right now. Hamden is considering a budget analyst in their charter revision process that they're going through right now, but no one at this point has one. And let me just underscore the point. Everybody talks about in 2002, we went to a strong mayor form of government. What we did in 2002 in Hartford is we went from a council manager form of government, where the council was the board of directors. The council was, in effect, the boss of the executive, to a balanced government where you have an elected executive and an elected legislative body. He is stronger as a mayor than the mayor you had prior to that time. And he is stronger in the sense that the mayor, all the mayors that have served in that period of time, are here full time, as I mentioned earlier. So the objective of the reforms that we were looking at was to provide the council with the legal ability to do their job. And we think that with a staff model modification, it will give you more of a fighting chance to stand up to the expertise that the mayor's office brings on the other side of the aisle. Those are the, I think those are the issues. We go on to the mayor from there. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Councilman Mitchum?
Thank you, Madam President. Two questions, unrelated. First, you mentioned how we don't have that much time to consider approved collective bargaining agreements. And I know that, at least my understanding is that right now, if we don't vote on an approved collective bargaining agreement, it just goes into effect. Is that, what is the authority that makes that happen?
State.
Is that charter or is that state law?
No, it's state law. It's a MIRA, it's the Municipal Employee Relations Act. So the way it works is once there's a handshake agreement on a CBA, it has to get to the legislative body within 14 days. And most administrations tend to drag. And then you have 30 days after that 14 days to act on the CBA. So it doesn't give you a lot of time to actually consider everything that you've done in the year, the 6 months, the 12 months, however long it's taken for them to negotiate the agreement. It doesn't leave councils with a great deal of time. And so my recommendation to you as a local legislator is to talk to your state legislators and see if we can do something about the timelines in MIRA. That's where you would have to.
Thank you. Second question. Concerning the legal counsel SEL that city council CIL can hire. We have hired outside legal counsel, certainly during my time on the council. And when we hired that person, it came up that we had a rule, and I'll admit, I don't remember if it was statutory or charter, ordinance or charter, that said that that person had to meet certain ethical and background standards. And forgive me that I don't remember if that was ordinance or charter, but does putting that in the charter, does it include anything along those lines?
It does. One of the things that I think is important is if the corporation council is conflicted, or the corporation council, so that you make a determination that you think the corporation council is focused on the mayor's side of an issue, if there's a dispute between the mayor and the council, or the corp council feels that you need an attorney of special expertise, you can go and hire your own attorney. The one thing that I've been recommending to my communities is you want the corporation council to sign off to make sure that the lawyer you're hiring does not have a conflict with the city. That's the sole basis for the determination. Now, the corp council might say to the president or the majority leader or the chair of the finance committee, whoever's generating the budget committee, whoever's generating the request for council, that, you know, this guy is not very good at what he does, and you may want to listen to it, you may not want to listen to it, because you may know that that person is, that she is the best lawyer.
Or gal, guy or gal, or gal.
I said woman, she is, I did say she is the best lawyer available. And so, I'm sorry.
Let me cut you off because I think my question is a little bit different.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. I wasn't clear. We had a rule. We have a rule that says, among other things, that to be hired as the outside counsel for city council, a lawyer has to have been, if memory serves, continuously earning their living as a lawyer for the immediate preceding 5 years and be in good standing. I think, things like that. Is there anything other than conflict language, which I understand, is there anything in this language of the proposed charter to say the person has to have a clean ethical record, be a lawyer in good standing, anything like that?
No, it simply says that the Corporation Council has to sign off that she is not conflicted with the city of Hartford. If you have other ordinances out there, you'd have to make sure when you look at the ordinances that they're consistent with the new provision. Those would not be inconsistent. If you want to have a stricter standard, you can certainly do that, but it would not conflict with this provision.
Are there any other questions from council members? Councilwoman Surgeon?
Through you, Madam President. Attorney Mesnick, so should this charter revision or the charter change passed, one of the, and I believe, I'm not sure where I'm at anymore, what page I'm on, it suggested that the council pass ordinance to implement some of these changes. At what point will these ordinances need to be passed?
Once you pass the charter, you should probably, if it says that you need to adopt an ordinance, you should do so as soon as possible if you want to utilize the section of the charter. So my recommendation is you do it as soon as possible. One of the things we did here, Councilwoman Surgeon, at the back of the charter, there's a new provision. I'll jump to it now since it really is an appropriate time to talk about it. It's the very last chapter. It's a provision that requires, I think we do this, hold on. That requires a periodic review of the Code of Ordinances. It's section 6 in the very last chapter. So remind me later, we don't have to do it again. And the significance of that provision came up when we did the first charter revision in 2000, my first charter revision in 2002. I and a series of 2 or 3 other lawyers were hired to do ordinance revisions because we wanted to get city manager out of all the ordinances. And I'm sure you know better than I that if you look at your Code of Ordinances, city manager is still in the Code of Ordinances. And so very often the council either gets burdened with the workload that it has, the natural workload of budget and other items that come before it, and you don't do these things, or administrations change and the priorities change. This forces you after a charter revision and every 5 years to take a look at your Code of Ordinances to make sure they either don't need to be updated or they do need to be updated, meaning there's a mandate to do an ordinance and you haven't done it. And so the objective is to, if you want to affect, the idea of charter revision is to establish your constitutional standard, but then to push to you, the legislators, the ability to legislate in real time. So the objective is not to tie the hands of all of you. Frankly, if I had my druthers, I would, when we get to the section on board and commissions, I'll say this again, that I would take all boards and commissions out of the charter. I'd mandate certain boards and commissions. You have to have a planning and zoning commission. You need to have a fire commission, whatever the commissions are that you think are necessary. But I would leave it up to the council to create the boards and commissions in real time so that you can modify them as needed and not have to wait for a charter revision for something like that. So my recommendation is if the charter says you need to adopt an ordinance, you should do so as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank
Any
you.
other question? Yeah, thank you.
Let me just go up and down my my screen here. Are there any other council questions?
Oh, one more question, Madam Chair.
You have the floor, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Regarding I'm sorry, I'm going through your animated charter with the red line. One of the things, Steve, it talked about having a budget analyst person to work with the administration. Does that need an ordinance or is that really appointed? Can't remember.
No, that doesn't, I don't, you will establish the qualifications by ordinance.
Okay,
Yeah, the objective is to make sure that you're hiring somebody who has whose qualifications are in accord with nationally accepted professional standards and best practices. And that person would be a classified employee, not a political appointee per se. A lot of your other employees will remain political appointees, but there will be situations where you will have classified employees that will be providing with advice. So that does require an ordinance to establish the standards that you would want.
so good, because I couldn't read that in it didn't kind of look like it had to be a city, and not, so this position is not appointed.
It's a hire, it would be a hire, yeah, it'd be appointment, but it would be a classified service appointment.
And that person does, or he or she, there will be no term, 4 years as a council. They will be there for as long as
they do their job.
Long as they do, okay. Where does it, I'm trying to look through the actual, how would I have interpret that by reading number 7, the budget analyst person? How it does say shall be qualified by.
It shall be appointed as a classified employee in accordance with the charter provisions on classified employees. That's where it says that they're classified, which means that they're not political. If you look above at the Director of Legislative Services, they have a 4-year term that's renewable by following approval of the provisions of this charter. So they would have a 4-year term. That is a more political position that the leadership would probably have the president and others would have a role in making, the president is the supervisor in effect, because the president is the head of the legislative branch. And so there are different standards and different types of positions to give you flexibility. But I will tell you over time, what happens is in New Haven, there are no political positions in New Haven. They're all classified at this point. So they tend to move in that direction over the course of time.
I appreciate you putting in there that the mayor and the Board of Education are required to provide the budget analysts with all financial and budgetary information. I appreciate that in there.
Yeah, thank you. I really think it's important. Just going through this debate in one of my other towns, boards of education argue that they are independent, that they are creatures of the state.
Yep.
And there's plenty of case law and they do have independent authority. You cannot alter their line items. They have control over their line items. But when it comes to procedural and administrative matters, local government under case law in Connecticut has significant authority over boards of education, and particularly when it comes to procedure, budget, etc. So even if you don't have authority to approve their line items, you can request that they fill out the same budget documents that every other department fills out, so you can see what their line items are from year to year. If you want to do a comparative analysis in terms of, are they telling you the truth about their bottom line, that they needed the money to spend it on X, and then you look at it the next year and they didn't spend the money on X, they spent it on Y. And while you don't have control over their lines, it certainly raises credibility issues when they come to you for more money the following year. So it's a tool that I used when I chaired the Finance Committee 25 years ago, that I've tried to put into charters for people.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure. Going to section 6 here, folks. I think it was a Councilman Sanchez who raised the question about the voting standard for ordinances. Was it you, Councilman? Somebody earlier discussed that. Do you want me to look at that section? This is the section that the Deputy Corporation Counsel raised about the higher standard. Do you want to?
Yes.
Okay. Then I will set that aside.
Madam President.
I will set that aside as an issue that you guys want to discuss at some point.
Mhm.
Any other questions on the council?
No, Attorney Madnick, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. So the next section is the mayor. Not a lot of changes in this section. The only changes we made are not substantive. We modified the compensation provisions for the mayor, which doesn't change it. He or she would still be paid at the rate of a judge of the Superior Court. This is something we adopted back in 2003. We did add that it would be include, because it does include in the state adjustments, accumulated cost of living adjustments, and reflect the changes in the base salary. Remember, this is something important to remember, the mayor is not entitled to a raise every time a Superior Court judge gets a raise. The mayor is only entitled to 2 raises in a 4-year term in accordance with the state constitution. It's not even your charter. For some reason, mayoral salaries are controlled, and so is the treasurer's salary, and your salaries for that matter, are controlled by the state constitution. So the changes were not substantive. They were just made as we were looking at the treasurer section, which we'll talk about in a minute. We made a determination that we should make it clear the mayor's salary is the baseline. The treasurer works off of the mayor's salary, makes less than the mayor, but it's the same standard. We decided to clean it up in this charter revision. Minor change, the state of the city has been moved from the, I believe, the first council meeting of the month of March to the second. And you'll see why we did that. We did that because it coincides with the delivery of the budget to the council. So we thought it was important to have the mayor's state of the city on the same night as he or she is recommending a budget to the council. Section 4, we made significant changes in the absence and disability provisions of the charter. At the current time, the charter does deal with the issue where the mayor informs you of his or her absence, but does not deal with the issue where there is a disability or absence that the mayor does not inform the council of. We did this in another community. I worked on this in another community. And what we did is we established an evidential determination. It's not a decision that can be made lightly. There has to be evidence, there has to be cause, there has to be medical evidence that's introduced regarding the incapacity to serve. And it's a pretty high standard. And you need 7 of your 9 colleagues to vote on that standard to temporarily to provide for a disability, a temporary disability of the mayor on that standard. And we also, I think, added, I think that's, no, it's not new, the standard that if the mayor is available by in contact with the COO, the mayor is not considered to be absent from the community. You could, if necessary, adopt, it's not mandatory here, going to Councilwoman Surgeon's point a few moments ago, there could be a procedural ordinance to further amplify and define this, but it would not necessarily be necessary. I think the language is fulsome enough so that the council can actually, operate under this provision. What you may want to do in a procedural ordinance is establish kind of the rules of a hearing. How would a hearing be conducted? We didn't address that in the charter. We think that is a better thing that could be addressed by ordinance by the council in real time. So it might be a project that somebody looks at. If you have a professional staff or a law student working for you, you might say, can you put together a procedural ordinance in the event we have to deal with a disability on the part of the mayor? Are there any questions on the mayor?
Let me just go down my screen, Steve Budnick.
Thank you, Madam President.
Attorney Budnick. Are there any questions by my council colleagues? There are not. You may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. The next section, which had been called other elected officials, was a section that was always dominated by the treasurer, and the other position was the registrar of voters. We just moved the registrar of voters because there's not much on it to, I think, chapter 2 or chapter 3, and we didn't change anything there. So what we've done with the treasurer that is new is we established this came up 7 years ago, I think, in our charter revision, and it didn't happen then. We now base the treasurer's salary compensation on the mayor's. The treasurer makes roughly $6,000, not roughly, exactly $6,000 less than the salary of the mayor, determined again off of the Superior Court judge's salary. Why $6,000, you may ask? I'll answer the question before you ask it. It's roughly the difference between a Superior Court judge and a workers' compensation commissioner. What we tried to do when we set the mayor's salary 20 years ago is to find a position that was relatively prestigious, but that was not going to be paying compensation at the level of the CEO of Aetna. And so the Superior Court judge is the lowest level judge in the system, and we tagged the mayor to the Superior Court judge. And we thought that it made sense to have a differential that was equal to the difference between a Superior Court judge and a workers' comp commissioner, is what it comes down to. Right now, that's $6,000. 10 years from now, when you look at the charter, it may be a different number. I don't know, and you might change it at that point. But that was the number, and that was I wanted to give you the rationale for that number. The other changes here are not earth-shattering. There is some new language. Basically, in section 2A, we make it clear that the treasurer is authorized to contract with such qualified public depositories into which funds will be deposited. He kind of has that, or she in the past and or in the future has had that authority, and we just wanted to make it clear in the charter that that is appropriate authority for the treasurer. In subparagraph B2, we make it clear that the treasurer has authority to approve disbursements from any trust fund, any of the trust funds that they have. Remember, he works with the pension commission. The pension commission would be approving these, but the treasurer has the ability to approve disbursements from the trust fund. We also make it clear in here somewhere, did I pass it? Or I guess it's down a little further. We made it clear that the treasurer is a fiduciary. If you go to D, the role of the treasurer with regard to city pension funds, we added a clause that the treasurer is a fiduciary of such funds. In fact, already the treasurer is, but we wanted to have that standard clearly delineated in the charter so that if somebody is elected to the position of treasurer and who really doesn't have background in that subject area, that they will see in the charter that they're called a fiduciary, and they better figure out what that means. It's a pretty high standard. It's probably the highest standard that we hold any public official to, elected official to, in the state of Connecticut, in our cities, to have a treasurer as fiduciary. The treasurer is also the manager of the pension commission. That has not been in the charter before, but that's been the role that he or she has played in the past. This is a new provision, subsection F. Like the mayor has the ability and the right to appear at and address the council and to cause proposals to be included in the agenda of the council. The mayor has a broad ability, right, under the charter to do that. The treasurer wanted to have a similar power, but the commission, working with the treasurer, narrowed it to a very narrow area. They would only be items pertaining to the functions of the treasurer as they relate to the administration of the pension commission. So the treasurer can't come in and say, the treasurer introduces an amendment to your budget. If the treasurer has an amendment to your budget, the treasurer introduces it the same way anybody else gets to introduce it. He or she would only have the ability to have the mayor's authority to put something on your agenda if it's specifically related to the administration of the pension commission. That's, I think that's it. And then there's another section on employees that basically reiterates what his authority or his authority is already that has the ability to hire and manage employees that are necessary to perform the work in the office, and then subject to the approval of the pension commission, which funds you don't control, the terms of employment contracts, and who the treasurer shall appoint and manage. So those are the provisions on the treasurer. Be happy to answer any questions. Oops, you didn't tell me I didn't change my PowerPoint.
Are there any questions for Attorney Mednick? Councilwoman Surgeon?
Attorney Mesnick, so the state treasurer has the same function, the fiduciary of the funds for the state?
Yes.
Okay, just want to clarify that's the same as the state.
Yeah, yeah.
And please bear with me.
Of course.
I don't quite understand the 6,000. So
Great.
basically, both the mayor and the treasurer salary is tied to the judge, you said, I think it was? A Superior Court judge, right?
Superior Court judge, yes.
But Superior Court judge gets 130. So the treasurer's salary, just use as an example, would be 6,000 less.
Be 124, yeah.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah, the idea that the treasurer should not be making more than the mayor.
right.
We were looking at modifying the standard and giving the mayor a kick to an appellate judge, but that was going to bring the mayor's salary up to 200,000 a year, and we didn't think that was something that would pass the Common Council or the voters. So we left it at the Superior Court salary and worked the treasurer off of that.
And why did we do 6,000 again?
The 6,000 number came from the differential between a Superior Court judge position of prestige, and then we were looking at the next level of prestige, and we looked at workers' comp commissioners that are now called hearing officers, and their salaries are keyed off of Superior Court judges, and they're one step below in terms of the element of prestige of their positions. I don't say importance because I think workers' comp is very important, but they make about $6,000 less at a certain level than a Superior Court judge.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Madam President, any other questions on this section?
I am checking my screen, Attorney Mednick. And I do not see any hands that are up, so you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This next section on boards and commission is something that we did a lot of work on. Boards and commissions are part of the lifeblood of your community. They serve very important functions in your community. You have advice and consent authority for most of them, all of them, just about. And as you'll see, you're going to have some appointing authority in this chapter that the commission has given you. But over the years, I have determined, and I've seen in my work with municipalities, issues relating to what does it really mean to be on a board and commission? Who am I responsible to? Am I responsible to the mayor who appoints me, or do I have a function or responsible to the legislative body that approves me, or am I responsible to the public? And what we try to establish here is that there are different roles that different members of boards and commissions have. You could be on an advisory board, you could be on a policy board, you could be on a departmental board, you could be on a regulatory board like a city plan, a planning and zoning commission that you have here in town, or a BZA or something of that nature. There's different types of roles that you could play, and members of boards and commissions need to take into account the differences in those roles. Some people may have both quasi-judicial powers, like well, you don't have a police commission, but if you had a police commission, police commissioners can deal with discipline, but they can also deal with policy. And so they have different types of hats that they wear. But the major point that we make here is that it is the public interest that they're representing. They're not representing a personal interest. They're not representing a political interest. When they're serving on a board or commission, Their job is to look at the facts that are before them and make determinations based on those facts. Not saying they should not take into account the position that the mayor may take or that the council may take on a given issue. They should certainly take all those things into account, but they should also take into account the testimony and the factual data that they appear and they review before their board and commission. So we dealt with those broad kind of definitional issues of what it is to be a board and commission member. And then we moved on to kind of administrative requirements. I won't get into all the details of this, but when you create a board or commission by ordinance, this is your Bible. This tells you what the elements are that need to be in the ordinance. How many members, how many terms, are they staggered terms, that you need to have chairs, what other officers do you want to have in there? Do you want to address minority party representation? It's actually addressed more broadly, but if you want to have a stricter standard that's in your charter that the state has, you would state so in the ordinance you create. There's meeting frequency is an issue you would address. We also created something here, and this came up, I think it was the town clerk, the city clerk who brought this up. I could be mistaken. If James is still here or Councilman Gale, they can correct me if I'm wrong. We decided to put a sunset provision in the charter. Our understanding was that there are many boards and commissions that don't meet at all, that don't have quora, don't have members. And so what this says is it adopts a standard that before the first day of June every year, the clerk shall report the following information to the Common Council in writing. The meeting frequency of a board. Are there boards that then should be abolished? By the council? Should you, if they're not meeting and they have no intention of meeting, you simply eliminate the board, repeal the ordinance. Why keep on the books a board or commission that is not serving a function? And you may do it more generally and say, do we need this board now that we have another board? It's something that you should look at. So this sunset provision allows for the elimination of boards and commissions that are just not meeting and just are not serving any function at all. We have language regarding public access, remote and direct public access to meetings. The state laws, still the default in the state is if you want to just conduct your meetings in person, you can do that. But you can also do exactly what we're doing here, or you can do a hybrid. And that talks about trying to make sure you provide maximum access for the public that has now gotten used to electronic meetings. And so one of my communities is moving toward a hybrid standard, but we didn't want to establish it constitutionally in our charter because they're not ready to do it. They need to change the acoustics in their rooms, and they need to have better systems so members of the public can actually hear them at home. We have a public comment provision in here. I think there's new to make sure that there's an opportunity for public comment. We point out that executive sessions are a thing, that while we say meetings are public, there may be a need for organizations to go into executive session, even though that's governed by the state. We thought it was important to put in here, particularly when we're talking about public access, that there may be the need for executive sessions. I think this is new. Let me take a look. 116 is new. Let me talk about required cooperation for a moment. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm sorry. Diversity. We want to make sure when the mayor and other appointing authorities are making appointments that they're taking into account the fullest extent of the diversity of the community, which is not only the diversity that you normally think of in terms of having a wide variety of individuals based on their backgrounds, but also geographic diversity to make sure that communities, neighborhoods are not left out when in fact neighborhoods should be represented. And so Section G in this particular provision deals with the issue of diversity. We also have a provision on required cooperation. This is a provision that I've been really recommending to a lot of my communities. We find from time to time that members of boards and commissions don't get information. And so we established this provision that the employees and officials who are working with boards and commissions need to provide the information to the boards and commissions. So it's a standard provision. I think I first put it in the New Haven Charter, and I think it's in the Hamden Charter now. I think I put it in Waterbury as well, and it works pretty well. It's a very good policy. We worked with the town clerk, the city clerk rather, on the administration of boards and commissions. Do I have that here? No. I'll get to this in a moment. And one of the things that this is the corollary to the issue of eliminating boards and commissions. Are people doing enough in the community to reach out and find people who normally wouldn't be asked to be on a board or commission to join a board or commission? And so we tried to create a twice a year standard. I think right now it's a once a year standard publication in a wide variety of places, electronically, in public spots and in neighborhoods, et cetera, that really requires the mayor to invite electors on a regular basis to send their names in to the town clerk, the city clerk, to make sure that they can be placed in nomination for a board or commission. And the way this charter works is you have to be on this list in order to be considered. So the objective, I mean, if there's nobody on the list, God forbid, we hope the list would work. I suppose the mayor can then make appointments. But the objective is to make sure that we set up a system where the city clerk, members of the council, the mayor, whoever wants to go out there goes out and recruits people, advertises, and seeks people to sign up on the lists. It also requires that the mayor and the city clerk engage in outreach efforts, working with political organizations, religious organizations, community-based, mutual benefit organizations, civic, social, and business organizations on a regular basis to try to find people to serve on boards and commissions. One of the significant changes that we made in the charter process this year is we moved away from the standard where the mayor appoints all the members of a board or commission. And we limited it right now to the charter commissions. And so if you take a look, the first one, the mayor never had an appointment, but historically, the Internal Audit Commission had a city treasurer appointment. President of the council would have an appointment approved by the council. And you would then have the 10 largest owners of taxable property would recommend 2 people to the council to approve as a third member of the Internal Audit Commission. Based on testimony before the council, the commission, they decided to move from the 10 largest owners of taxable property, which is becoming a harder number to find, to the Metro Hartford Alliance. So the non-official appointees would be recommended by the Metro Hartford Alliance to the council, and the council would approve one of the 2 candidates. Board Assessment Appeals, currently the mayor has all 3 appointments. Under this proposal, the mayor would have 2 and the council president would have 1. When I say the council president, please understand it's not a unilateral power because she'd have to have it approved by the council. So her proposals would be, her nominees would be approved by the council, as the mayor's would be as well. Planning and zoning, the mayor currently has 7. Under the charter revision, the mayor would have 5, and the council president would have 2. Planning and zoning alternates, the mayor has 3, and that'll be a 2-to-1 breakdown. ZBA, the mayor currently has 5, and it would be a 4-to-1 breakdown. And the ZBA alternates, instead of the mayor having 3, the breakdown would be 2-to-1. And so I'll point out for the record what I pointed out to our commission when they were going through this discussion. This is a very different provision than you'll find in any other charter in the state. It's perfectly legal. It's perfectly appropriate. You have a right to establish the appointment standards for these boards and commissions, but there are very few other communities that have anything like this. So Hartford is taking a move in the direction of the state. In the state, a lot of boards and commissions are appointed by, not by the governor, but by the governor and legislative leadership. So I just wanted to point out those changes. The next part of it is we did a significant amount of work and review on police issues, and there was considerable discussion about having a police commission. And what we did in the charter revision is we acknowledged that there are boards and commissions that are required by the charter. So they're not created in the charter, but they're required by the charter. One is a Police Accountability Review Board. Remember, you've adopted, I believe, have you adopted an ordinance? I think you have a resolution right now. I think it's a resolution creating this entity. And what we're saying is that you need to now move forward and create it. Keep in mind that it's an advisory body, so it's different than a police commission, but that's what the commission has recommended, that you require the development of your Police Accountability Review Board, that you really make it an ordinance. To Councilwoman Surgeon's point, this would require an ordinance. The same is true, not the same is true, because you already have an ordinance in category 2. The Civilian Review Board and Inspector General are already covered by an ordinance, but this mandates that they remain covered by an ordinance. So you can't eliminate it. You can't eliminate the Inspector General unless you have a charter revision to get rid of the Inspector General and to get rid of the Civilian Police Review Board. So it mandates these entities, but they're created in real time so that you can make appropriate reforms and modifications as a council. The last category is not police, but ethics. This mandates you have an ethics commission, but your charter is one of the few that I've worked on that doesn't mandate an ethics commission. And so we simply mandate it. You already have the ordinance, so you don't have to adopt a new ordinance, but it mandates that it remain in place. Let me see if there's anything else here. Oh, the last 2, I think that's it. The last 2 things I want to point out here is that the Pension Commission and the Greater Hartford Flood Commission. You're going to ask, what is the Greater Hartford Flood Commission? One of the big projects that was part of this process, you may remember that the president brought me on board about 2 months before the commission was created to take a look at all the old special acts in your charter. And I distributed to staff today, and I want to make sure you get it. There's a document entitled Code of Special Act Authority pertaining to employees' pensions and retirements pursuant to Chapter 7, Section 4B of the Charter. So it's about over 100 pages of regulations that are currently in the back end of your charter that have for 20 years really driven me nuts, because I said, why are these provisions here? Do they apply to anybody? I thought we were going to get rid of them completely, but we reserve the right to keep them alive. But we have, by charters, put them in a separate volume that will be kept by the city clerk, kept by the treasurer, to make sure that if anybody from World War I or World War II that is entitled to a benefit that was created in the 1930s or 40s is still alive to receive those benefits, we're not eliminating those programs. We're just moving them in to a separate code. We took out of the special acts the pension commission provisions that they currently operate under and put them all in the body of the charter. So you'll see those in Chapter 7. The same is true, I was surprised to find this out, the Greater Hartford Flood Commission is an active commission. It was a commission created by special act. They had some legislation in the last year or so that gave, the governor used to have the appointments to this commission. It now gives the appointments to the mayor. And the charter revision reflects that change. Is that enough? That's it. That's boards and commissions. That's the heaviest chapter, folks. Are there any questions? I'll be happy to answer them.
Councilman Mixton?
Thank you, Madam President. Attorney Mendick, I know this is like back to page 2 of boards and commissions, but
Okay.
the diversity provisions, you talked about both race, color, creed, and neighborhood, the representation provisions for boards and commissions.
Yeah,
Are they binding or are they just precatory?
what the language specifically says, if you go to page 47 of the red line, let me see what it is. I don't know, are you guys working from the, you're probably working from the clean document. Let me tell you where you can go and see it so that we can look at it together in real time.
42 of the clean document.
I'm assuming that you're working with the document that was initially sent out, but let me find it. Residency requirement removal.
I'm working with page 47 of the red line document.
You have the red line, I know that.
Yeah.
The others may be working from the, here it is. It's on page 42 of the clean document, of the document that was sent to the city clerk.
Mhm.
And so what it says is boards and commissions should reflect the diversity, including race, color, ethnicity, religious creed, age, sex. I think we included most of national origin, ancestry, status as a veteran, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, familial and marital status, pregnancy or physical and mental disability, and cultural makeup of the city in order to achieve a representative balance of its residents. Hartford is committed to ensuring fair representation on all boards and commissions, and the boards and commissions of the city should reflect or should include balanced geographic representation from throughout the city. In addition, if you go to the next paragraph, of equal weight, the mayor and other appointing authorities are obligated to take into account, to consideration rather, a diversity of backgrounds, experience, expertise, as well as personal integrity, and a commitment to ensuring an ethical and transparent local government. That was language that actually came up in our public hearing by some citizens who appeared before the commission. So that's the answer, Councilman. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, let me, just so I'm clear, it says it should, but suppose that a commission is, over the course of time, people are appointed and someone looks up and it's all 40-something Jews who live in Parkville, just to pick one example. There's nothing, I mean, it's not like suddenly some of those people are disqualified because other neighborhoods or other, it's just this would be nice. It's not a binding rule.
Well, they're required to consider, and so there's two or three different check stops here. One is the mayor herself should be making determinations about what kind of people he or she is appointing to boards and commissions. But the second stop on the road is the council. So everybody needs to be mindful of what these boards and commissions look like, where the representation is coming from. I think it's something your city clerk, who's going to play a bigger role under this charter, dealing with boards and commissions, should be should be given the authority to pay attention to, so that you guys get reports periodically to show what the balance looks like on these things. So all of that's not spelled out here, council member. But I think that if you have provisions like this, you can certainly amplify the provisions through ordinance or through resolution or whatever legislative action you want to take to make sure they're implemented. No, there's no guarantee. I agree with you there, but I'm not sure how you would guarantee it. People need to be vigilant.
We could then, within the context of our authority as council and this charter, we could pass, you're saying, an ordinance that says X commission shall have one representative from each of these, listed neighborhoods or something like that.
Yeah.
We have the authority to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You have the authority to look at it. I would make sure you talk to corporation counsel as you're doing it to make sure that it works. But yes, you do. What we've done in other communities, you don't have council districts. What we've done in other communities, in Hamden, we're going through this right now with an expanded police commission and a diversity, equity, and inclusion commission, and one other finance commission, 3 commissions that we've recommended be created to have representation of each geographic council district. Now, as a council district, the fairest breakdown, it's a legal breakdown. It's a breakdown generally of the city or the town in some legal way, and that it's one person, one vote, and that's the way it's broken down. So that's the way they're addressing the geography issue. And there's a rule there that we were originally going to say you cannot have more than one, but we now say you cannot have more than 2 from a geographic area. And in the case of Hartford, you'd have to have an ordinance defining what those geographic areas are, because you don't have you may have voting districts that are not electoral districts. So you'd have to figure out what your districts are, how you break down your geography and your map. That would just be too deep down the rabbit hole, I think, for the Charter Commission to put that in the charter. Thank you, Madam President.
Other Councilwoman Surgeon.
Through you, Madam President. Steve, I do have to commend you on the compensation and the commissioners on the compensation for being on the charter. I think we certainly, I think it's number 10. You can compensate for transportation, childcare, so on and so forth. Is that prohibited, or is it not? Can be done?
Well, no, we put that in there. I see James, the chair's here. We put that in there because we wanted one of the speakers we had, James, correct me if I'm wrong, during our Board of Education programs, I think it was the professor from Northwestern, talked about ways to encourage people who would normally not be able to serve on a board or commission to serve. And I think that we relax the compensation standard to meet that objective, so that somebody who needs the funds can apply for the funds to do that. And we didn't get granular about it and say that we should be providing daycare. But it could lead to something like that. If you want people from the community who don't have as much free time as others, then I think we had to relax the standard.
No, great. No, I commend the commissioners for that. It does say transportation, childcare, and other services.
Yep.
To facilitate diverse participate, which I think is needed. We have a lot of single parents in the city who would love to volunteer, but most meetings are in the evenings. What do? You bring the kids at 6 o'clock in the evening without feeding them first. It goes a long way.
Thank you for noticing that, and I'm sorry that I didn't present it more directly. James will probably slap me on the wrist tomorrow for not being more direct with you about that. That's a good one that I forgot about.
Oh, that I'm reading along as you try to go through everything.
Okay.
Earlier on, you had mentioned boards and commission of basically council, doing away with anything in the chart and just by ordinance doing new boards or commissions. So in your PowerPoint presentation, you have 5 or 6 boards and commission. These are the only ones that are in the charter. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we are mandating, they're not in the charter, but we're mandating by charter. Actually, this is the way it should be done. That Police Accountability Review Board, Civilian Review Board, and Ethics Commission. That is the way I would do a charter if I had my druthers. What you'd have to do, for example, what I would do is I would take these commissions, these 6 commissions, they're important commissions. The Internal Audit, Board of Assessment, we might leave the Internal Audit Commission in the charter. We'd have to think about it. But some of the others you are really critical, and you say, you shall have a Board of Assessment Appeals, you shall have a Planning and Zoning Commission, you shall have the alternates or the ZBA and the alternates, but then create it by ordinance, so that if you want to make changes to the way you appoint boards and commissions or to the size of the board or commission, you don't have to wait 10 years for a charter commission or appoint a charter commission 2 years from now. And so I would do the same thing with departments as we move it. And I really would love to see, I haven't yet accomplished that. I've encouraged communities to do it. We have moved in that direction. We've kind of done that a little bit. Hartford's ahead of the rest of the towns because we only have these 6 that are mandated or that are here in the charter. And now we have these 3 categories. So maybe this is the first baby step toward moving them out of the charter and into the Code of Ordinances mandated. So you have to have them and they'd be mandated. And the way that you make sure that there's continuity is that the year you move them out of the charter, you put them into their own sunset chapter. And once an ordinance is adopted, compliant with the charter, then the charter provision goes away because then you have the ordinance, but you still have the charter mandate for it. So that's the way I would encourage you. That's a big job. And that's a big psychological shift for a community. And maybe one of these days before I take up professional shuffleboard, I will have an opportunity to do that in one of my communities, but we'll see.
So I thought like depending on some of these commissions or some of these boards, aren't they mandated by legislation? By the state legislation?
Well, you need to have a lot of these boards. You need to have a Board of Assessment Appeals. So we have enabling legislation. So you need to be able to do it, and you have to do it in accordance with the statute. But what I'm saying is that you can do it just as easily by ordinance.
Okay, got you.
And same thing with planning and zoning. Planning and zoning, your commission actually is by ordinance, but because it's here, I actually made I did a reversal on my position and actually created it within the charter so that the ordinance can probably go away. But at some point you may want to consider going in that direction. I'd say the same thing is true of departments as well. That again, you mandate services and create your departments by ordinance and by budget.
So basically, before we vote or approve this, we could, should there be enough votes, possibly take this out of the charter and send it to and then create ordinances for it.
You could do that. That would be a big lift right now in the process. It would be a big lift. What you might think about doing as a council is you might think about setting a little study group together if you want to look at issues like that. And the next time you do a charter revision 10 years from now, or sooner, if you decide to do it, you may have a list of things that you'd like to have done in a charter. I have seen that mechanism work in different places.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on this section?
Thank you. Good.
Okay, so Attorney Magnet, to be mindful of everyone's time, what I'm going to ask my council members, because we do plan on keeping this in committee so that we can have further dialogue and conversations with you, and the chair is to continue and just go through all of the chapters, and then we'll leave it open for questions at the end,
Okay.
because I see that we still have a lot to go.
Yeah, it's not as
Thank
bad.
you.
It's not as bad as you think. Although the budget section is going to be a pretty interesting section to go through. So,
Okay.
department heads and I mean, you would think there's a lot, but there's not a lot in the department section. We did very little in this section. I think, modified. I guess we shifted the content of reporting requirements for the director of finance from one section to another. That's literally the only thing we did. When you look at the red line, as I'm sure Councilwoman Surgeon is doing, you'll see a lot of red lines in the section,
Yes.
but they're mainly definitional changes. When you look at it, you'll see the word chief is capitalized instead of lowercase. So there does look like there's a lot in here. The word ordinance is capitalized. Director of finances, I capitalized all titles in the charter. So that's why you'll see red lines even in sections where we did virtually nothing. Please look at the red line. If I missed anything, it was inadvertent. And so that's all we did in that section. Board of Education, we talked about the realignment of the election. The only substantive thing in the Board of Education is in section 5 called community outreach. And what we did there, and again, this was based on some of the programs that we had, was that the board is obligated to engage in outreach efforts to increase participation by the public in activities of the Board of Education, by reaching out to religious, political, community-based, a lot of the same organizations that we referenced earlier in trying to build up our boards and commissions. So again, they're semi-independent. They're an independently, well, not fully elected body, but partially elected body. And we thought it was important to at least raise that issue with them and see how that goes and see if they engage in those activities. And again, you working with your colleagues at the Board of Education could take a look at that issue as we move forward. Now we're in the budget. And I'll try to walk through this as quickly as I can. We did a lot of work here. We worked very closely with the budget people in the city, with the budget director, with the mayor's office, a lot of with leadership. I believe we talked to Mally during this process, and TJ during this process, and others during this process, and tried to create a budget process that is somewhat streamlined and well-defined. And what we try to do is we try to define what the budget system is. I won't get into all the details of it, but we also made sure that the capital and operating budgets are approved simultaneously. We want to make sure that there's, again, public engagement in this process. We would think the budget document needs to have performance measures in it, service levels in it, differentiation of services to residents, both in terms of policy and service design, that when the mayor presents a budget, should be able to show how it is spent throughout the town, throughout the city, and how it is how it addresses different priorities throughout the city and town in terms of differentiation of services. Again, we spend a fair amount of time defining it as a public record, open for public inspection. You see that a lot in the revised charter. A real emphasis on public participation. I'll talk about it in a moment, but one of the things that we have in here is a budget calendar. I think, is this the place to talk about it? There's a budget calendar. And right now, the members of the public, I mean, maybe they produce a budget calendar, but this mandates the creation of a budget calendar to show the public when public hearings are going to be held, when the council is going to act on it, when the mayor, when the budget is sent to the mayor, when the mayor sends the budget to you, all those kinds of things are laid out. We really think that the charter really lays out that public access online should be through social media, the city website, We believe that dashboards should be created so that members of the public can really understand their budget, that it just shouldn't be when I served as chair of the finance committee, we could barely figure out what was in the budget. So I never understood how the public would do it. But we have technologies now that really permit the public to be more fully engaged and get this record out to the public. We have a provision in here, a cooperation provision. And I will be very honest with you, the main reason I have recommended these over the years was to deal and make sure the boards of education understood that they are a part of the city. I'm not saying that's been a problem in Hartford, but I think we put this provision in Hartford right now. It's not in here. We're just putting it in this charter. I thought I might have done it before in Hartford, but I did not. The budget estimates. This again, we want to make sure that the budget reflects adequately the reasons why things are in the budget. One of the things people don't think about is the impact of a collective bargaining agreement on the budget. People in council positions get reports on overtime, police overtime, fire overtime are the two large departments that have that. Public Works probably has it, but Public Works is probably much more directly related to real functional obligations they have. And so we require in the charter that the mayor actually lay out the drivers of budget lines. Are there provisions in a collective bargaining agreement that drive large amounts of money that and why? Are they related to deployment of services by call-ins? Are they related to contract provisions as opposed to service requirements? And the idea there is so that you as a council can get, and the mayor can get a better idea as to why this money is being spent, and is it being spent on real public need? It may be. It may be there's a rationale for those provisions, but there may not be a rationale for those provisions. So those provisions are now required here. All right, here's the calendar. And let's talk a little bit about the differences in the budget process now and the budget process going forward. But let me just tell you one other thing, little secret. And you have Matt Ritter to thank for this or not thank for this. Back in the late aughts, actually in the late teens, in 2018, I believe, Speaker Ritter had some legislation that was adopted and passed that permits a charter amendment, a charter revision of budget scheduling a budget scheduling by legislative action. You don't need to create a charter commission. You can simply adopt a amendment. It would replace the language in your charter by a 2/3 vote, so long as it addresses the budget adoption dates, basically. So it would be when your public hearings occur, when the fiscal authorities act, what kind of publication, if you are a city with referenda, and when the final adoption would occur. So all of these things we are doing by charter revision, if you don't like them a year from now or 2 years from now, you don't have to go to the president and say, Madam President, we need another charter revision. You can go to the president and say, can we revise our charter by adopting by 2/3 vote a modification of the budget section? So I just wanted to point that out. It doesn't directly relate to what we're doing right now, but I'm actually going through this in another community. I'm starting a budget for them. I'm starting a charter for them in the fall, and they've had huge budget problems. And I said, why don't we simultaneously do a 2/3 budget change and change that part of the charter immediately with under the Ritter statute, for lack of a better term, we'll call it the Ritter statute. And they love that idea. So it'll probably be the first time I've done that. I've never done one of these, but it'll be kind of exciting to change a charter by statute as opposed to going through the charter revision process, but it's very limited to budget. So that being said, I hope I didn't bore you with that. Let's go through the budget. So right now, the mayor determines when the estimates come to him or her, and the same standard will exist in the new charter. We have a budget calendar. There is no budget calendar now. So the the director of finance has to create the calendar before the first meeting of the council in January. So the beginning of the year, the finance director will come to you and say, here's the budget calendar for the year. Now, a lot of the budget calendar is based on what's in the charter, but it requires that it's published in one place during that course of the year. And it's a good discipline to lay the list out so everybody's working from the same list, as opposed to going through the charter and recreating the list every year. The budget right now is proposed to the council the third Monday of April. Under the new charter, it'll be the second meeting of the council in March. And remember, I said earlier, the mayor's state of the city will be the same night. That's why we moved the state of the city. So we're actually moving up the submission date. So you have 2 extra weeks, I think, almost 3 extra weeks at the beginning of the process when the mayor submits the budget. The public hearing standard remains the same. We do have in the charter, not a requirement, but an ability and really encouraging you to have additional public hearings that would be properly noticed, and that you need to have your final public hearing 14 days before the adoption of the budget. The date of council adoption is the same date, although we stretched it out to 11/59/59 on that date to make that clear that is the deadline. And we didn't change the consequences for failing to adopt or approve a budget. And excuse me 1 second here. I'm having a problem changing pages. There we go. Transmittal to the mayor right now. I couldn't believe it. The charter's silent. We now have a standard that it has to be no later than the close of business on the 24th of May. Currently, the mayor has 2 days to get back to you. Under this, the mayor has no later than the close of business on the 27th. So he has an extra day to get back to you. And the standards are relatively similar for failure of the mayor to act and final action, although final action now is not later than the last day of May. And now we've made it on the first business day of the month of June. So we changed the calendar in that way. But as I've said to you, and please look at it, make sure you're comfortable with it, particularly those of you who do budget stuff, although I think you probably do it by committee of the whole, but you really should take a look at that and make sure you're comfortable with it so that if we have to make changes, we can do that before this goes to the ballot this year. But if you don't like it in a year, Matt Ritter will tell you how to do it. He has an ordinance and he has a statute that you can do it under, and it's a really nifty tool.
Steve, is there any line item veto for council?
I don't think we changed that. I think that the council can change lines in the budget as it always has the ability to do. I don't think that has changed. James, you're here. Do you remember?
Yeah, I believe we clarified it to ensure that there was a line item.
Yeah, we made it clear. I think that Councilman Gale actually participated in that discussion.
Where can I find that?
Let's take a look. Hold on. This is a section we did so much that you just can't, it's not going to stand out. So I've got to. Yeah, here it is. In its sole discretion, here, let me find the section. It is section, I'm looking in the red line document. I'll give you the section number. Section 4B1. The council has in its sole discretion the ability with respect to any appropriation to insert new line items of expenditure or to increase, decrease, or strike out line items of expenditure. So that section, just to repeat, 4B1. You can't modify debt service, which is a current standard. And you cannot increase the mayor's estimate of receipts, which is a current standard. So those items were not changed. But the line item was reinforced to make it clear that that's what it was. I didn't hear who answered. The president asked the question. I'm trying to remember who asked the question. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. I'll go through this pretty quickly because I think I kind of covered it already. We require budget messages from the mayor. The new elements, there always has been a budget message, are we want the mayor to be able to explain major fiscal and programmatic changes from the current fiscal year, from the prior fiscal year. Another change is we want the mayor to be able to discuss the debt position of the city, including a statement of bonds to mature and interest payable on bonds outstanding. As a former member of a legislative body, I was always ticked when they came to us, oh, we need to go out to market. Well, how come we didn't know this? Because our bond position had changed. Well, why didn't we know it before you were going out to market? So we require that in this charter. We also ask for assumptions. A lot of people don't realize, you do, because you've been through this many, many times, most of you, that budgets are assumption documents. And so they're often unstated in the budget. This charter would require them to lay out assumptions that were taken into account for any financial forecasts and estimates of expenditures or revenues in the proposed budget, including the amount required to meet existing CBA contract requirements pertaining to workforce requirements in particular. We also placed in here a requirement that those of you who've been around at least during the last 10-year cycle know that every 10 years you approve a plan of conservation and development, right? It's required by the general statutes. Does anybody have any idea what happens to the plan during the 10 years before you change it again? You don't have to raise your hands. Okay.
It's different planning and zoning.
Yeah, I get it. But there are implications that it has. How is it being implemented? What are the costs? Are there costs related to it? This provision simply requires that the mayor explain how the budget relates, if at all, to the plan of conservation and development. The budget fund, again, the italicized words are the new things. We want to make sure that revenues, including sources other than the tax levy, are laid out very clearly. Actual revenues collected in the last fiscal year, revenues during the current fiscal year prior to the time of preparing the estimates. So there's a whole series of things that we've required and worked with the finance director, and they bought into it and feel pretty comfortable with the criteria that is established here. Again, this is where we talk about the assumptions again. And again, the council may, by ordinance, establish criteria that the mayor could use for estimating cash receipts from sources other than tax levy, but it's not required. Then in addition to that, we have, I think this is relating to expenditures. Again, this deals with the issue in the budget itself of the schedule of maturity of bond issues, so that everybody understands when those things are happening, how debt is dealt with. We want to make sure that we have information regarding collection rates that go back to the last 5 completed years, as well as an estimate for the current fiscal year. And again, we want to make sure that the budget has very clear delineation of the expenditures that are required to meet CBA requirements, CBA requirements that are in the budget. And so it includes a fairly detailed analysis of the things of the programs, and do you have enough money placed on the side? Now, this is based on years of working with municipalities where overtime is constantly coming into city councils throughout our state, town councils throughout our state, and even town meetings throughout our state, because they under budget for the overtime. Most overtime is predictable. If there's a tornado or a storm that comes through, or a pandemic, although I think municipalities save money in the pandemic, but if there's a trauma, we can understand it. But police and fire overtime tend to be driven by contracts, not by incidents on the street. And so this simply requires that up front, we acknowledge and know that we're going to have this overtime obligation during the course of the year, and it's driven by a contract provision. And what that may force people to do is look at the provisions and see if they're necessary as the mayor goes into the next round of collective bargaining agreements. So the idea is to disclose the sources of these types of aggravations that council members have and mayors have throughout the state. I talked about this. We talked about the plan of conservation and development. 5-year estimates are included in the budget so that people are projecting, the mayor is projecting, and the council and your budget analyst can really analyze it and make a determination as to whether it is sensible. We make sure it's very clear. We add provisions on capital budgeting to make sure that the capital budget process takes place simultaneously, and that you get the information that you need to be able to make determinations on capital spending. And that's it on the budget. We're almost done here, Madam President. Chapter 11, there were no, I'll tell you what it is. Hold on 1 second, please. Chapter 11 is borrowing. There were a couple of minor changes in this section relating to no, actually, I don't see any changes in this section. They're just capital. They're just definitional changes. Oh, there is a you'll see the term majority vote of the council is used in this section, for example, but there's no other substantive change in that section. Article 12. I talked to you, so you can tell me to stop now. I talked to you about the periodic review of ordinances. I won't repeat it any more than that. Remember, that's after every charter revision, you should look at them, and every 5 years. That's your charter. And I hope I didn't bore you, or I hope I didn't go too fast, but I just wanted to make sure we got through the document.
That was a very well put together presentation. I thank you both again and the commission for the hard work that you've done so far. And so now I'm going to open it up for maybe 15 minutes of questions. I want to be mindful of everyone, and I want to apologize for Councilman Sanchez, but where he's at, he ran out of battery. So let's see here, Councilman Mitchum.
Thank you, Madam President, and I second the Council President's comment. That was thorough and informative, and not too much, given how much it is. A question about what the mayor is required to do, the state of the city and the various budget explanations. As it stands, my understanding is that the mayor is not required to come before the council and answer questions directly himself about the budget. At least he didn't. So I assume he's not required to. Do these revisions require that in that explanation part? And if they don't, could the charter require him to come before council to answer questions?
The answer is no, it doesn't the second answer is yes, you can. New Haven, traditionally, where I grew up in politics, the mayor appeared once a year before the Board of Alders, and it was a state of the city. It was a regal evening. The mayor would walk in, give his speech, and the press would follow him in and cover it as if it was the presidential State of the Union, and then he would leave, and that would be it. In my time in New Haven politics, I could probably count on less than 5 fingers the number of times a mayor actually testified before a committee of the Board of Alders. But in other communities, it's different. In Bridgeport, the mayor presides, but he doesn't speak. In West Haven, the mayor sits with the council and can speak and can be asked questions in their circle. In Middletown, the mayor presides, doesn't speak, but presides. So you can establish a standard. If you want to have a questioning period, there would be no legal inhibition. The real question whether you want to change tradition to have the mayor do it. So the way the commission did it, from my perspective, and I'll let the chair speak if I'm misstating it, is we require the mayor to speak volumes in the information that we have requested the mayor to speak to in the budget. Not this mayor, all mayors. Whoever's the mayor in the next 10 years would be covered by this. But you can, in fact, but it doesn't have a questioning period in it. It's an address, basically.
Are there any other questions? Councilwoman Surgeon? You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Again, thank you for all your due diligence. Stephen, I want to thank James, Mr. Wolf, for taking up the responsibility for being chair of this charter provision. I think you guys have given us a lot to digest and go over and think about. One of the things which I did not see here or have any listen to any conversation regarding district election. As Steve, I think you spoke that there were 2 towns left within the state with district election. I mean, not district, majority elections, and very few towns have this. I'm sorry, let me start over again.
At large.
There was only 2 towns or 2 cities left, which has at large districts and not district election with a strong mirror form of government. Did the commission take that up, talk about it at all for minority, also including minority representation with district election?
James, do you want to take this? Do you want me to respond? Or?
Yes. Thank you, Councilwoman Surgeon. Yeah, it was something that was certainly considered, but ultimately that didn't make it into the final package. As you can see, there's a significant amount of changes here, and we didn't make changes to every section, and that's one of the changes that ultimately didn't make it. But it was something that we considered and certainly took a look at. And I think there were, divergent opinions on the commission on that issue.
And also in conjunction also with that is the school board recommendation. I thank you for considering moving it to be in conjunction with the council mayor's election, because apparently turnout for the Board of Education election over the last several years on its own has not been very well attended. So that's a good thing. But again, you guys, what was the conversation with keeping it as 4 elected and 5 appointed? And also, was the council, I didn't see if anywhere the council was given, just like you did in boards and commission, was the council given out of the 5 seat, 1 or 2 out of 5?
So there was conversation about different models for boards of education. I think they're based upon some of the expert testimony. A lot of times the changing. Well, I guess I'll back up. I think the decision was making a significant change again to the appointing authority of the Board of Education. Might be too many changes within a small period of time. As you all know, before the Board of Education was taken over by the state in the city of Hartford, it was fully elected, and then it was taken over by the state. And we've gone now to our current system. And then within, it'd be the course of 25 years, there would be another change again, which I think seemed like a lot of change in a pretty short period of time. So one of the things that we did want to address, though, is turnout. And I mean, it was very clear that having this election on its own was not helping with turnout and was not raising the profile of the election in the way I think folks thought it would 20 years ago. So putting it on cycle with the mayor, the treasurer, the council, constables, I think elevates the issue of the Board of Education, makes it part of a conversation in that election, brings it on par with a lot of other municipalities and when they hold their Board of Education elections. So that's ultimately why I think the commission went in that direction.
So,
and with regards to answer the second part of your question, to answer the second part of your question, the providing council with appointments to the Board of Education, while it would be possible, again, would be unprecedented. And so to make the change that we recommended by giving, for example, planning and zoning Board of Appeals appointments by giving appointments to the council, I think it was thought that those were pretty significant changes, in that making another change to the Board of Education in such a short period of time historically might be tumultuous to the education system here.
well,
And
let me
we also didn't determine whether or not that was legally feasible because of Title 10 may have standard there that we did not look at, but that was not an issue that came up. But it would be different than our standard appointments to boards and commissions that are fall under home rule.
But here is the thing, you mentioned turnout, you mentioned elevating the Board of Ed to on the cycle with the council and the mayor, but yet still only 4 is elected and 5 is appointed. If we're talking about the involvement of the residents and the parents, again, we are going back to, the mayor and council appointing 5 and only 4 is elected. And we talked about want to increase our turnout or elevate the Board of Education to a sense of, the residents and the parents taking ownership of that. Excuse me. I apologize. I've got a little noise in the background. So what was I'm trying to understand your thought, and, any of the members, what was their thoughts on getting more elected?
Could you repeat that last part of your
I'm so
question?
sorry.
Getting
Yeah, I've got noise.
more
Yeah, the election, increasing, would like you guys to think of increasing the electability part, electing more members to the board. It's a 9 members board. It'll be nice to see more elected. So therefore, ownership of the education part can be, more involved with the parents. So that's what I would like to see. And for me, through the presentation, I commend the commission, and I think you guys have done a fantastic job in the short time, and trying to get this in as much as we can possibly change. But what I see is a very small substantial change to the charter. One of the things I did come and I testified regarding the budget process. I thought that was a good idea. I commend you for taking our consideration, trying to get the council members a little bit more actively involved in boards and commission. But the actual governance of the city I also would have loved to see more emphasis being placed on district election more than anything else, especially with a strong former mayor of government, and Hartford being the last one to change that governing process. So that's all I have to say, Madam Chair. And Steve, if you don't mind me giving you a call to ask a little additional questions.
So Councilman Surgeon, we as a caucus are going to meet to discuss. So that way we could, keep this in committee and have Steve speak to all of us at once during caucus, and then he could speak to the working party in their caucus, so that we might keep our questions available to everyone. Councilman Gale, followed by Councilman Sanchez.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And just to respond to Councilwoman Surgeon, you may be interested to hear this, Councilwoman. We did receive, as Attorney Mednick mentioned, we had testimony from various folks around the country who came and spoke to us directly about increasing participation in elections. Because when I came on to the Charter Revision Commission, and we were asked what was our primary concern, I indicated that my primary concern, like yours, was the lack of voter participation in our municipal elections. Not just Board of Education, that's the most serious extreme example, but even council and mayor, we have very low participation. And so they did bring in experts, and the two takeaways from my perspective, and this is what I heard, others may have heard something else, but I heard that the two things that increased voter participation the most were district elections and nonpartisan elections, a very, very dramatic change for Connecticut, not going to nonpartisan. And so I was one member of this commission, one of 14, who was in favor of district elections for board and city council and nonpartisan. Suffice it to say, Councilwoman, that my position did not rule the day. And what you have in front of you is the result of 14 commissioners coming up with their proposals. So I just wanted to give you that perspective. As Council President mentioned, we're going to talk about this some more. And in fact, Council President, I know Councilman Sanchez has his hand up, but I'd like to kind of put a motion on the floor. Maybe he can just respond to it. That says, my motion would be that we table or postpone further consideration of this matter until a successive meeting of the Committee of the Whole, when we have more opportunity among ourselves to deliberate all of the various provisions before us.
I'd like to second that.
So a motion has been made and properly second. Are there any discussions? Yes, Councilwoman.
Yes, ma'am. This is a heavy lift. And I really think we really need to maybe the two session, because there is so much information and there's so much questions that needs to be addressed that, I don't really think postponing it to one more meeting is going to, we've only been doing this for 2 hours and I control my thoughts and my questions, because there is so much information that I really think I would like to understand a lot more before I can vote on this commission recommendation.
Absolutely, Councilwoman Surgeon. So we will address all those issues.
And more time.
Absolutely. And more time, as long as it takes us to get through this. Keeping that timeline so that it does get to the ballot in November. So with that said, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
abstentions?
Aye.
Any noes? The motion carries. It passes. Everyone, thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned and have a good night. Yes. Yes.
Have a great
Attorney
evening.
Nesbitt.
Can
When
we
is the
assume
next
that,
meetings? When is the next?
yeah,
scheduled
can we assume the
meeting?
next meeting is, were you supposed to have a public hearing next Tuesday?
Next
Are you-
Tuesday. So I'm gonna go on the record that tomorrow, my office will contact your office after I do an availability check for everyone.
Okay.
And we'll set the date tomorrow
Thank you, Madam
on the
President.
record. Thank you.
Thank you, members, for your courtcy. Appreciate it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you all.
Mhm.
Thank you, everyone.